Do the Ravens need more at the outside linebacker position? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, or daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And we're back here with another midweek edition. The offseason chugging along. Soon enough, we'll be at OTAs, then training camp, the preseason, the regular season. I'm excited to kind of have these milestones checked off so we can get back to Baltimore Ravens football. Here today, we're going to be answering your mailbag questions. That'll be in the final segment. But I do want to kind of talk a bit about the outside linebacker position today for the Ravens. It's a position that obviously heading into the offseason was a pretty big need for them. And look, they've added David Ojabo in the draft, but outside of that, they haven't really addressed the position. Now, I know they tried. We'll talk about that still. But in the second segment, I do want to talk about if the Ravens need more at the position based off of what they already have. And in the first segment, we'll talk a bit about Vince Biegel, the Ravens' newest linebacker, who is very versatile. We'll just get into that signing a little bit in terms of what he can bring and everything. The Ravens obviously signing him on Monday, so I'll be getting into that in the first segment. So a ton to talk about today on Locked On Ravens. But before we get into the content, if you're here with us on YouTube, you can see my face and my background in video form. Thank you for tuning in and watching here today. If you want daily Ravens content 5 days per week, Monday through Friday, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. It does really help out a ton. I greatly appreciate everybody who's already subscribed. And if you're thinking about it, I highly recommend you do so if you want daily Ravens coverage in video form. But if you want it in audio form, we're there too. And a shout out to all the audio listeners as well. The same show, obviously, both audio and video. Be sure to follow us anywhere you get your favorite podcast. That can be Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And be sure to turn notifications on. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's now talk about the Ravens signing of Vince Biegel. Now, outside linebacker, inside linebacker type guy. This is a very versatile player who can play both. Now, the Ravens have him listed on their website as an outside linebacker. That's also where I would expect him to get the majority of his snaps. But we know the Ravens love their versatility. And to have a guy like Biegel who can play multiple positions is a very good thing. Now, some background on Biegel. He's played for multiple NFL teams, most recently the Miami Dolphins for the past 3 seasons. Went there in 2019 from New Orleans, and then from New Orleans, previously before New Orleans, he was in Green Bay. Now, Biegel did actually tear his Achilles during the 2020 season in the offseason, so he actually missed the entirety of the 2020 year. So technically, he's only played for 2 years in Miami, or he only played 2 years in Miami, but he was with the team for 3. So in his 5 seasons, 4 of them where he's been able to play, he's totaled 81 tackles, 2.5 sacks. He has an interception as well. Now, this signing isn't a move that's a needle mover, right? This isn't like, oh, the Ravens signed Vince Biegel, they're going to win the Super Bowl now. This is all it took. No, obviously, this is not that needle mover signing. But again, this is a 53-man roster that every NFL team has. Not every spot on a roster is going to have a star player. So I've seen people say, this signing is terrible. Why would they do this? They need depth. They need depth at a lot of different positions. The linebacker position, especially on the outside, being one of them. And again, we'll get into that more in the second segment. This is a fine signing. It's not one that I necessarily love. It's not one that I hate either. I'm really right in the middle on it. I put out an article on Ravens Wire, my grade for it. I gave it a B-. It's not a move that I think will have major impacts, all things considered. It could, right? Biegel could turn into this amazing player and all of a sudden have this huge role depending on injuries, but he also is a very good special teams player, and I think that is where he will end up either making the roster or not making the roster. And that's another thing too. It's not like Biegel is 100% a lock to make the roster. It's almost like the Mike Davis signing where you love to have the depth. It's a veteran addition. But at the same time, if a guy comes in and outperforms Biegel at the outside linebacker position, the Ravens do have a couple of really solid undrafted outside linebackers, for example. If one of those guys outperforms Biegel, then hey, you have the option. I assume the deal, I haven't seen the details of it, but I assume it's probably for a veteran minimum. So it's a low risk, high reward move. The Ravens love their special teams, and if he can make his bread and butter there, I think he has a pretty fair shot to make the roster, especially with just what the Ravens are going through with the position right now, where he could even maybe carve out a role for himself on the defensive side of the ball. So overall, I'm not too worried about this signing. It's one that I think is solid overall. And Biegel also has some experience with now current Ravens outside linebacker coach Rob Leonard, who was in Miami for a decent while before coming over to the Ravens. So the familiarity between Biegel and Leonard is apparent. And maybe this is a player that Leonard kind of banged the table for and said, hey, this would be a great addition. And again, this is a signing that I think is fine. I'm not going to put too much stock into it. We'll see when final cuts happen if he actually ends up making the team. But can play versatile, or is a versatile piece on this defense that I think can make maybe an impact or two here or there, maybe an impact player too. So yeah, that's really what I have on the Beagle signing. It's not one that I'm overly concerned about, not one that I'm losing much sleep over. So if you're panicking about it and saying, oh, is this all they're going to do with the position? I wouldn't anticipate that's all they're going to do with the position. Again, you never know with these things, with these teams, but Beagle will be an addition that will try to earn his way onto the Baltimore roster over the course of the 2022 offseason as we head into training camp in the preseason, of course. But also just a final thing going over to actually the secondary. Marcus Peters talked with Jeff Schreberg at The Athletic, a very, very good read. I highly recommend you go over there and read it. And just talked about his offseason a little bit. He's talking about owning a professional sports franchise now. He's in the fan-controlled football league business now, and that's really cool to kind of see him enter that realm. But also he's talked a little bit about just how, he never got injured before. This was his first really big injury, and he's talked about how it kind of put things in perspective for him and said that things have been going well, but also he's not going to put a timeline on things, and I think that's a smart thing to do. I know sometimes people can have that timeline well, okay, if Marcus Peters can come back by, I don't know, August, September, right? It kind of puts pressure on the player a little bit. And so I think it's smart that Peters isn't putting a timeline on his recovery, just kind of going with the flow, figuring out when he feels right. But he did say when he's ready to play, he's going to be out there and playing. So, he's a very good football player and someone who is a very smart football player as well. And I think he's smart in terms of this as well, to not really put that time frame on. But also we talked a bit about his looming free agency. Peters obviously signed that extension, 3 years, around $42.5 million before the end of 2019. He's scheduled to be a free agent again at the end of this year. So 2023 free agency he'll be able to hit. And he said that, he'd love to stay in Baltimore, and if things get worked out, they get worked out. But right now he is focusing on getting his leg healthy, playing good football at a high level. And it's good to focus on that stuff now. But I know for many people who weren't really sure if the Peters signing was going to work out, the trade was going to work out, I was one where I thought it was going to be a pretty nice transition from him over from Los Angeles to Baltimore after the trade. And again, they gave up Kenny Young in a 5th rounder for Marcus Peters. That trade was unbelievable for the Ravens, and it's gotten better and better. Obviously, unfortunately, he wasn't able to play in 2021, but he's a player that is bought into this Ravens culture and is one of those guys where it's like, you don't like him if you play against him, but you love him if he's on the team you root for. And so for Peters, he's someone who, being able to kind of go through his journey in Baltimore has been great. And if he wants to come back, it seems like by all accounts, what he said he does. If the Ravens want to continue that partnership, I think that'd be very smart for them to do. Now we'll see how the season goes, right? If stuff doesn't go well and other stuff happens, then maybe there could be a split in the making. But I think it'd be very good to see the Ravens bring back Peters. I think he's earned it, and I think he will earn it again in 2022. And it all depends, I think, on how he bounces back from this injury. I think he can do it. I think he can. But I think it does depend on that and just when he's able to get back and he still play at that high level. But again, I do have confidence in what he can bring to the table and that he'll be able to return to his former self, which is a very good NFL cornerback for sure. We'll head into our first break here, though, on Locked On Ravens. Still a ton to talk about. When we get back, we'll be diving more into the outside linebacker position for the Ravens in general, talking about if they need more there. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about on Locked On Ravens. But first, let me tell you a bit about Built Bar. And imagine dipping your finger into that plastic tub of birthday cake frosting and opening your eyes and realizing that was only 150 calories and 16 grams of of protein. That's what it's like to eat a birthday cake puff from Built. If you haven't tried the puffs, they'll really be a good thing for you. And I want to tell you that they have delicious flavored marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. They're a chocolate covered marshmallow protein bar. And make every day your birthday with Built birthday cake puffs. They've taken the delicious experience of being a birthday cake and being able to bite into that, and they put it in 100% white chocolate and added sprinkles as well. And they have proteins which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. To go to built.com to get birthday cake puffs now. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. I really do appreciate it. If you're here with us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel, like the video as well. It helps out a ton. Also, if you're in audio form, be sure to follow us and turn notifications on. Well, let's now talk about this outside linebacker position for the Ravens. And it's one where, again, going into the offseason, pretty big need. They had a couple guys scheduled to hit free agency in Justin Houston and Pernell McPhee. Neither of those guys have been brought back yet. It seems unlikely at this point, I'd say. Pernell McPhee is brought back. It seems more than likely Justin Houston is brought back, but you never really know at this point. Then there was how could they address the need in the draft? And they did it. They took David Ojabo, but the thing with Ojabo is obviously his Achilles injury. He tore it during his pro day. So when is he going to be able to get back? Is it going to be at some point in 2022? Is it more of a redshirt year? He'll come back and play in 2023. We don't really know at this point. So what the Ravens have on this roster, and I'm just going to read it straight from their website. What they have on the roster at the outside linebacker position is Vince Biegel, who we just talked about, Tyus Bowser, Jalen Ferguson, Dalen Hayes, Jeremiah Moon, David Ojabo, Odafe Owe, and Chuck Wiley. So when you're looking at guys who can contribute immediately starting off next year, at the beginning of this upcoming year, what you have is Jalen Ferguson, Dalen Hayes, and Odafe Owe, right? Those are the guys who you can say, all right, those are obvious locks to make the roster, and they will be 100% healthy, at least at this point from what we know, 100% sure during the 2022 beginning of that year. Now with Bowser, you hope he's healthy, you just don't know. With Ojabo, you hope he can come back, you just don't know. So really, it's three guys right now. It's Ferguson, it's Hayes, and it's Owe. And maybe an undrafted guy like a Jeremiah Moon and Chuck Wiley can make an impact. Those are two very good players. But I think at the end of the day, what you have is a need. And it's a need that hasn't necessarily been addressed in a way that you can say they have four huge contributors this year at that position. I think they have two combined. I think Owe is going to have a huge year. Hayes is a little bit of an uncertain question mark right now, but I have confidence in him. Jalen Ferguson, this is year 4 for Jalen Ferguson. He's going to have to step it up, and his roster spot is not necessarily a lock if the team brings in more options. I'm going to assume Justin Houston is back again. You never know. It's a player, though, that brings the veteran experience, understands what it takes to play in the Ravens defense. Now, obviously, the transition from Mike McDonald or from Don Martindale to Mike McDonald, I think some will remain from Don Martindale's defense, but it will be, I think, a little bit different. But regardless, he's been in the organization for a year, knows the players, knows just what it takes to be a Raven, as cheesy as that sounds. So I think bringing Houston back is the smart move. The Ravens signed with that UFA tender, and that tender, I think, is around $2.5 million. So to bring Justin Houston back at that price, I think is a very, very good deal for them. And I think his season gets underrated a little bit, honestly, because the sack numbers weren't necessarily what we saw when he was in Indianapolis for those last 2 years, or what he did in Kansas City. Obviously, is he the same player he was in his prime in Kansas City? I mean, no, he's not. But I still think as a veteran, as a leader as well, that can be something that the Ravens can really use on this team. But I do want to talk a bit about, and this is interesting to me, and it's something I've kind of talked with a couple other people about, and I've mentioned it on the show before, is Malik Harrison. Now, Harrison is a player that John Harbaugh said is going to cross-train at both inside linebacker and Sam. And while I don't think he's necessarily your pass rushing specialist type outside linebacker, you can bring him down. And Spencer Schultz and I talked about this yesterday, and I completely agree with what he said. You can have him be a very good run stuffer, set the edge outside linebacker guy on first and second down. You can put him in on third down too if you want to. But I think in those situations, obvious passing downs, you'd probably opt to go more with Owe, and assuming Houston is back, maybe Houston, maybe Hayes, etc. But Harrison's a player that I think has the body to play outside linebacker as well. He actually did play at the position. You saw him play up at the line a lot at the outside linebacker position, a little bit on the edge. At Ohio State during his college days, we saw it a little bit also during his first couple seasons. Not a ton, but we did see it a little bit. And I think that now, with the Ravens just not having a ton of options, that could be an option they use. Now, is it the flashy name? Is Malik Harrison a flashy name at this point at the outside linebacker position? I mean, no, he's a player that was drafted as an inside linebacker. I anticipate the Ravens to use him at the inside linebacker position for sure. But I think that they have to use their options. And that's part of the reason why I think at this point, bringing in Houston, and then do they bring in another veteran option, right? Is there an outside linebacker on the roster already, like the undrafted guy, Chuck Wiley, who could make an impact, for example, who could be their fifth guy at this point, assuming the four who make it are Houston, assuming he's back, obviously, then Ferguson, Hayes, and Owe, and then Ajabo, let's say, starts there on the PUP list, so he doesn't count against the roster at that point. But then maybe the Ravens opt to put Biegel on the roster. So then your five are Biegel, and then Ferguson, Hayes, Owe, and obviously Houston, assuming he comes back. And then maybe, I don't know, Biegel gets cut when Bowser is ready to come back, and then something else happens when Ajabo is ready to come back. They have the pieces when everybody's healthy. They definitely, I think, do have the pieces when everybody's healthy. If you can roll out, like, let's say David Ajabo comes back, I don't know, week 10, week 11 or something. Like, if he's back after the bye, right after the bye happens, the Ravens have their bye week 10. If the Ravens also have Tyus Bowser back at that point, and they can roll out Bowser, Ferguson, Hayes, Ajabo, Owe, and Houston as 6 guys, I think that's what they can do and be pretty confident in it as well. And they don't have to go out there and sign a Jadeveon Clowney and be like, all right, we have to address it. I don't think this is a room right now where they have to panic and throw money at a top guy like Jadeveon Clowney and say, hey, we need you here. That's not what they need to do. But I think they do need to address it because it was a need going into the offseason. And I do want to say it was not for lack of trying. The Ravens had Zadarius Smith. Well, at least we all thought they had Zadarius Smith, and obviously they agree to the deal. It goes through, and he ends up in Minnesota. So they understood it was a need, and I think, again, people are saying, well, why would you take Ajabo if he's not able to play this year? Ajabo is a first-round pick when healthy. That was a pick that I am very on board with. I loved that pick, and even if he's not ready to play at all this year in 2022, you have a player where it's pretty much like trading a 2022 second for a 2023 first. Now, if I'm in that situation and I have the ability to do that, I'm taking that deal 10 out of 10 times for sure. But it doesn't necessarily kind of get away from the fact that the Ravens do still have a need at the outside linebacker position. So many people, I think, are fixated on wide receiver right now. And look, rightfully so, right? There are options on the market that can help them at wide receiver. They missed out on Jarvis Landry, but there's Julio Jones, Will Fuller, T.Y. Hilton, etc. But I think another need that I think is being overlooked right now because people are so focused on wide receiver is outside linebacker. And again, I'm someone who doesn't like to put stock in anything until it's all done, right? So Justin Houston seems really likely he's back, right? But the thing is, he's not back yet. So I'm like assuming he's back, but at the same time, he's not back yet. There could be something that happens where, look, with Melvin Ingram, the Chiefs signed him to that UFA tender, and I'm sure a lot of people thought he was going to be back in Kansas City, but then he ends up signing with Miami, and all of a sudden, that's an option for the Chiefs at the edge rusher position that they didn't have anymore. So for Houston, you just can never really be confident until it's 100% done. At least that's my approach to how these things work. So is to not get burned by it and say, oh, well, Justin Houston's back, and then he ends up signing somewhere else. But I think, again, the plan for them, I think, should be Houston for sure. Like, that is 100% for me. Like, that's something that needs to happen, in my opinion. And if they keep 5 on the roster and they want to roll for right now with Biegel, Ferguson, Hayes, Owe, and Houston, and then put Bowser and Ajabo on the PUP list, then sure. And then you can use Harrison in that role too and just kind of work with what you have and then hope Bowser can be back maybe by the end of his PUP stay. If he does end up on the PUP list, who knows at this point, but ideally Bowser will be back healthy 100%, but the Achilles injuries, you do never know. So I think, again, the outside linebacker position of need, I think I do put it right up there with wide receiver, 1-2 in terms of wide receiver, outside linebacker. That's a debate. If you have a preference on that, I'm actually curious to know what it would be, because I think Baltimore has the pieces. They might just need one more piece to put them, again, at a position where I personally would feel comfortable with that. And for me, I think that piece would be Houston, again, in a limited role. I think Odafe Owe, I'm buying the Ravens 2 first-round 2021 rookies. I'm buying their stock to the moon. Rashad Bateman, clear number one wide on this team right now. Odafe Owe, with Bowser being out, clear number one outside linebacker on this team right now. And you just have to look at the workloads, look at what they did in their rookie seasons. I think both of those players will have huge second seasons, not just because of their talent. They're all very, very talented players, don't get me wrong, but they will have huge roles on this defense, which I think will contribute to huge years for both. And I think we'll be able to see what they're able to do at a much larger scale this year for sure. But we'll head into our final break. I'm going to get back on Locked On Ravens. We'll be diving into your mailbag questions, so be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about on Locked On Ravens, of course. Don't go anywhere. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Bet Online. And our partners, Bet Online, continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. And if your team's eliminated from the playoffs, mine being the Denver Nuggets, so it's been a little while, you can still find the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, which are still going on, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. Bet Online is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Bet Online, where the game starts. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you. And again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. I really do appreciate that. And be sure to subscribe on YouTube, like the video on YouTube in audio form. Also, be sure to follow us, turn notifications on, and be sure to make your second listen Locked On NFL. You can go check out my Monday episode where I talk with a couple of hosts from around our network about Jarvis Landry, etc. So be sure to make your second listen Locked On NFL. Let's dive into your mailbag questions now. We have three really good ones that I do want to dive into. It actually fits pretty perfectly with what I wanted to do in terms of episode structure today. So first, we're going to take a look at a question from Likely's Burner, who asks, who's the receiver they're looking at? And I wish I could tell you. I really do wish I could tell you. The options right now, though, again, it's something I've talked about before on this show. You have to account for missed time. I still think they should bring in a veteran free agent, whether it is Julio Jones, Will Fuller, T.Y. Hilton. Those are some of the top guys who, at this point, top guys is a relative term, because obviously at this point in their careers, the injury history is there. They haven't been able to put together healthy seasons, a lot of them or at least consistent healthy seasons for a long time. I think my top choice is Julio Jones at this point, somebody who can be that big-bodied receiver. You also look at Will Fuller and T.Y. Hilton, two field stretchers, but both have pretty big injury concerns. Will Fuller's injury history scares the heck out of me. I mean, he has not been able to play a lot over the course of his career, but when he's been on the field, he's been incredible. Julio Jones, we know the track record in Atlanta, right? We understand what he was able to bring to that team for so many seasons, but a lot of hamstring injuries there, and just a guy who always seems like he's playing hurt and not at 100% at all the time. So I think if you're going to sign one of those guys, you have to have a backup plan, because I think with the Sammy Watkins injury, the Ravens did have the wide receivers to kind of soften the blow of that before he came back, and then Watkins came back and didn't really make an impact. But I think this year you're going to be relying on Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace. You're going to be relying on those guys to make huge impacts. So I think if you bring in a veteran receiver and he misses 4, 6, 8 games, you have to have a backup plan, whether that's an undrafted free agent, someone else, or just, game planning around it. But also with the way that the Ravens drafted, taking 2 tight ends in the draft, not taking a wide receiver, the Ravens could opt to keep just 5 wide receivers this year, which, again, if the Ravens do sign a veteran, it would be veteran, Rashad Bateman, Tylan Wallace, James Prochet, Devin Duvernay, and then maybe a guy or two on the practice squad. Benjamin Victor and Jalen Moore have been there for a while. Maybe Slade Bolton, someone like that makes it. But I think at the end of the day, the Ravens should sign a veteran. The room is so young right now. There's a lot of experience that I think could be added in a veteran, and just to help mentor these young guys, put a little bit of production on the field as well. That's obviously very important when you're talking about the game of football and bringing in guys to contribute. So I think, Julio Jones, Will Fuller, and T.Y. Hilton would be my top 3 choices at this point. This isn't March anymore, right? You don't have the luxury of being able to choose from every single free agent wide receiver that was available on the first day, right? It's the middle of May right now. So they have to make do with what they have. They missed out on Jarvis Landry. That was unfortunate. He was my top choice, but I think they should be looking at a veteran receiver. That's my stance on it, and I think that'll be what it is. But I still have confidence in the young guys. Just because I want them to sign a veteran doesn't mean that I think that Rashad Bateman isn't worthy or Devin Duvernay isn't saying, you're right. At the end of the day, I think the Ravens have talent at the position. I just think it would benefit them to add a veteran at the end of the day. Our next question comes from Jose Caratini III, who asks, is the real reason Lamar is not signing a contract because the Ravens won't allow him to be a true quarterback and only want to run him into the ground? No, I don't think this is the reason for me. I think the reason, I've said this before on the show, is that Lamar Jackson wants to maximize his value. The 2021 season for him, especially the end of it, was not the best. I mean, at the beginning, he was in the MVP conversation, right? I mean, that week 5 Indianapolis game, he led the Ravens to an amazing comeback. He went off in that game, and people were talking about, is this another year where Lamar Jackson wins the MVP? But then obviously the Miami game really began that downfall for him during the 2021 season. He got injured against Cleveland, and I think him missing those games and not having the strong end to the year isn't going to put him in a situation where he can sign a contract and really have it be the absolute maximum he can get. Whereas if he goes out, has a great 2022, makes the playoffs, makes the Super Bowl, wins the Super Bowl, he can make tens of millions of dollars that way. I mean, it's incredible how much money he could make if he did that. I mean, we saw it with Joe Flacco, where Flacco turned down the extension in the contract year, bet on himself, and ended up winning the Super Bowl and made tons and tons and tons of money because of it, tons of extra money. So I think Jackson's just betting on himself. And I mean, he deserves to make every penny of a contract that he signs, whether he ends up making 35, 40, 45, 50, etc. He deserves every penny of that because he has proven that he's one of the top quarterbacks in this league. I think that, again, with a year of success in 2022, where people can kind of forget about the end of that 2021 season where he wasn't playing well and got injured, I think that is where his value is maximized, as opposed to right now where people still kind of remember the injury, kind of remember what his season was like after the Miami game and during that Miami game. So I think, Jackson also has played it very smart, because what you're seeing is these contract extensions with Deshaun Watson and Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, etc., where they're getting huge money. And Lamar Jackson, I think, is benefiting from that, and he'll be able to make a little more money because of that as well, as opposed to whether he signed the extension during the 2020 offseason, the 2021 offseason, right? It's all different, where the longer he waits in terms of the salary cap going up and everything, if he can maximize his value, I think that's a smart play for him in general. So I think that for me, it's not a matter of whether the Ravens are running him into the ground or not. I think they're allowing him to be a player that can really do a ton of great things at this level. But I think what we're now going to see is him bet on himself in 2022 and hope that he can maximize his value, which I have confidence he can do in a very big way. But our last question here comes from Ofida Foy, who says, hi, Kevin. I saw a tweet saying that the cover 3 defense was a system that was used during rookie minicamp. Do you think we will change our defensive system from 3-4 to 4-3? Thanks for your work and have a nice day. And also, just a thought, if the Ravens want 2019 offense back, I'm all in. What do we need to make a better version of it? So yeah, two good questions here, 2 good points. So the first part about the cover 3 and rookie minicamp, switching from 3-4 to 4-3. The Ravens have been a 3-4 defense for a very long time. And it feels like switching over is a possibility, but it's not necessarily something that I would anticipate happening. There's just a lot that goes into a switch like that. The Ravens have the personnel, I think, still to play a very solid 3-4 defense overall. Now, we could see it. We could see the switch to 4-3, and they try to kind of maximize their personnel to that. But I think for now, my bet would be on keeping it at 3-4. You never know. We're not going to necessarily know until we start to see it on the field. But again, with the whole 3-4 versus 4-3 thing, it's not necessarily as big of a deal, I'll say, anymore, because teams don't usually run base defense a lot. There are some teams do more than others, obviously, but the Ravens, they don't necessarily run base defense a lot anyway, so they're not going to have the traditional base defense out there for 95% of snaps. They'll run nickel, right? The 3 safety looks, for example, they can do as well. So I think when it comes down to it, the base defense will still be a 3-4, but we're not going to see them run a ton of just pure base, because their defense relies on guys playing out of position and being versatile and doing stuff all over the field. So that's where I am with that. And then in terms of if the Ravens want the 2019 offense back, what do we need to make a better version of it? Well, I think if you want to start there, you need offensive line. And the Ravens have heavily invested in that group, obviously signing Morgan Moses and drafting a couple guys as well, Tyler Linderbaum, Daniel Falele. But I think that's where you start. And then, obviously, I think if you want the better version of it, if you have the offensive line, if you have the ground attack, a better passing attack is what you need to have a better version of it. The Ravens pass attack in 2019, they relied on running the ball, right? That's what they did. I think the Ravens, if they can go back to what we saw during the first half of 2021, where I thought the passing offense looked improved. If they can have that while still running the ball a bit more, obviously going back to a bit of their 2019 offense where it was just ground and pound, bully ball, which I think they could definitely do, I think is a good idea for them. I think their strength is on the ground. That's not saying they can't throw the ball. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. But if you can have that better passing attack, I think it will go a long way. If you want to pair that with the 2019 offense, let's say, that's where it all starts for me. If you can have that really just terrifying ground attack that terrifies defenses, and then also have the defense worrying about the receiving core with Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman and maybe a veteran and all those guys. That's what I'm thinking will be maybe the thing that puts the 2019 offense and improves it a little bit. But you, again, have to have the offensive line, have to have the running backs, and just being able to run the football like they did in 2019 is be able to bully guys off the ball there for sure. But that's all I have here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back to tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.